A very warm welcome to the RYA Knowledge Zone. We're delighted once again to welcome a Dinghy Show regular and top tactics coach for the British sailing team, Mark Rushall. Before I hand over to Mark, if you do have a question, then please type it into the question and answer box, and we'll do our very best to answer it at the end of the session. Sorry. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for having me. Welcome to my office.
It's great to see you again.
Yeah, good. So apologies if I'm a bit incompetent with the technology, but here we go. Half an hour is actually quite ambitious to cover strategy, tactics and rules. So I'll just tell you what my plan is. I'm going to start with my 3 hats model as a way of guiding the decisions we make as we navigate around the racecourse. If you've been to previous Dinghy Show talks, you may have seen some of this before. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. And if it's too quick, don't worry. I'll give you a link to my website where there's a longer video version. So then I'll take a few classic dinghy racing situations and use them as examples of how the strategy might help drive the tactical decisions. And as we do on that, excuse me, as we do that, I'll touch on the changes to the racing rules that are relevant to those situations. The application of the rules as far as races are concerned has actually changed very little, so there's not much new to learn. And as Hannah says, do fire your questions in, and we'll have a go at those at the end. So, first question: what do I mean by my strategy? It's definitely not a roadmap. It's not a route around the racecourse or a list of directions. I think that's way too prescriptive for a variable environment. It's more a set of priorities that help me make my minute-by-minute decisions. It's a reminder for me of where my focus should be and on what the cues for action should be. For instance, boats, clouds, ley lines, compass, so on. Ultimately, the strategy drives each small decision. It's my big picture, hence the big picture. And it stops me agonizing over the details. Where shall I start? Should I duck or tack? Should I follow or split? All of that stuff. If I know what I'm trying to achieve, the answer to those questions should come almost automatically. So what's your process? One of the best sailors in the country dropped into one of my Finn strategy sessions unannounced about 10 years ago. And that's all he could give me in the briefing, in the debrief. Right, felt good. So I guess what I'm saying there is if you don't have a process that you can explain to anyone else, but you make good decisions all the time, don't mess with it. Carry on carrying on. But if you find you never do quite as well in the big races as you do in small ones or training races, you're probably relying on your boat-on-boat tactics, reacting to the challenges as they come along, rather than having a clear big picture that gives you a framework for those snap decisions. So you don't have to use my process, but it might give you the inspiration to develop something better, something that suits you and your style of thinking and sailing. So the idea is that at any time on the race course, one of 3 sorts of effects will shape our strategy. If we know which one, we know where to look for information, we use less bandwidth making those small decisions that come along. The inspiration originally came from Stuart Walker's book, Positioning. And the idea to represent it as a Venn diagram, click, 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 thank you, came from one of our young 470 sailors who's won quite a lot of world championships since. That's why it's called Dobson's Choice. Okay, so my first category, as you can see, is shifts. If the shifts are following a regular pattern, they've got time to go at least once each way over the length of the beat, and there are no other significant influences. The shortest route up the beat, as we all know, is achieved by tacking on the shifts. It doesn't matter what the other boats are doing. So long as you stay in phase with the shifts, you will sail the fastest route up the beat. Your focus is absolutely on the compass if you've got one, or if not, on your angles compared with the other boats, on your angle compared with the land, or for the windsurfers, they just gauge themselves against the angle of the waves. So in a sea breeze, we might see those lovely sinusoidal, long oscillating shifts. And then the optimum time to tack is when your compass dips below the mean, heading for that tack. That way you sail the shortest course possible. Inland, it might be more about tacking when the jib backs. So it's maybe possible to think about your venue, your boat, and the specific weather conditions for you where shifts might be a strategic priority. For example, if your boat is heavy and very slow tacking, or very, very fast and very slow tacking, the shifts need to be much bigger to make a tack worthwhile. If it's very light winds in nearly all boats, it'll probably be worth ignoring the shifts to sniff out a bit of extra breeze. These are the comparisons that very quickly become class, weather, and venue dependent. One way you might verify this is by thinking back to a day you remember where either you gained by nailing the shifts or lost out through ignoring them. What were the factors that made that day more likely to be a shift day? What we're doing there is thinking, if I'm going to split from the fleet, what will give me the confidence that today's a shift day and make me do it? Past experience, maybe getting out early to track the shifts. To recap, in shift mode, I'm not worried about where the other boats are going. All my choices, my starting strategy, the choices I make when boats cross, when I'm approaching the ley lines, they all enable me to stay on the lifted tack for the maximum amount of time. So next is what I call a gain. And a gain could come from a traditional land effect. Oh, I can probably go click. Ah, very good. A gain could come from a traditional land effect, a wind bend, more wind or tide on one side of the course. That's what some sailors call a gain feature. But it might also come from sailing to the next patch of pressure. That might appear anywhere on the race course. It might not be in the same place all the time. So here's a simple example. We've got the wind bending around the headland, classic Portland situation. And it gives a continued advantage to the left-hand side of the race course. So with my gains hat on, all the focus is on getting the boat to the area of gain as quickly and as efficiently as possible. My starting strategy, my first decision, everything has that in mind. I follow the gain to sail a shorter distance or sail there faster, or maybe both. So same question, really. It's probably worth thinking about what the gains might be for your type of boat and what are the conditions they're more likely to be present in. Some boats double their speed in double the wind. Some just point a tiny bit higher. And most boats have an upper wind limit where actually any more breeze doesn't give you a gain in VMG. You'll actually go slower. Or for some classes, sailing in flatter water might be the biggest gain, more important than anything else. Once again, having the confidence to push hard for that gain, to fight for that gain is key. You might have some past examples that can help you work out how you can build that confidence. Sometimes it's not that obvious. Any shifts are completely wacky. We've got no idea what's going to happen next. On days like that, even a little bit of certainty might help. So what do we know? We know where the marks are and we know where the other boats are. So there we go. It's all about positioning. My strategy now is to put my boat where there's the least chance of losing out if something changes and the best chance of making a gain if something changes. The positioning rules don't stop you. They stop you making a big loss rather than giving you the perfect track around the race course. It's a holding pattern in some ways. So the most obvious positioning rule is take the long tack first. And there are a few. These are my golden rules of positioning. You might have your own hard-earned ones. If you want to see mine explained in more detail, you will find them on my website, which is there. There's a little video explaining exactly what I mean by the rules of positioning. Okay, so when do I back myself? When I'm choosing between a positioning strategy or a shifts or a gains one, it might help me to do a little bit of risk analysis. And this is my graphic equalizer. The further I am to the right on any of those categories, the more likely I am to be able to be happy to break my positioning rules and sail with my shift or my gains hat on. I think here it's helpful to recognize your own preferences. We all have different risk thresholds. And the great thing about sailing is that even with hindsight, we rarely know what the perfect decision might have been. For some people, just naturally take bigger risks, expect bigger results from it, and end up with slightly less consistent results. For me, I'm a bit of a conservative sailor, so I tend not to win so many races. I tend to be a little bit more consistent. And of course, the points end up the same for both. Okay, so is it really that simple? That strategy in under 10 minutes? Most often not, of course. That's why it's a Venn diagram. There are purple and orange and green patches, as well as a blue, yellow and red circle. At some stage on any leg, for example, you'll run out of shifts or gains, and the only important thing will be your positioning. Otherwise, you'll never get to the mark. So things might change as the leg progresses, and the conditions might change. Or you might know that today, on today's race, sailing to the random patches of pressure is going to be the race winning gain. But I can't see any at start time. In that case, I might prioritize the knowns, the long tack, for example, but be ready to switch into the gains hat as soon as I see one of those pressure patches appearing up to windward. So now I'm going to look at some decision pinch points and discuss how that model might help us pick the right tactical option. So I was going to poll you, but you just have to have a thought experiment here. Where would you start? First marks to up the page. Wind is slightly left. We've got a port bias start line. Be very interested to see who chooses where to start. It's a bit of a naughty question, really, of course, because there's not enough information to decide. So I'll set the scenario. It's a shifty offshore day. The shifts are fairly regular, but big. The line is set with a small port bias to the mean wind, and the beat is fairly square to the mean wind, but the wind is left at the moment. So for me, I think the most likely priority is going to be the shifts. I've got my shift hat on. As the wind is hard left at start time, that means although the start looks really pin end biased, if I start there, I'm not going to be able to cross the other boats. So what I do is choose the start that's going to get me onto that lifted start attack as soon as possible. Pink looks great on paper right now. Look at the grey line, gain line. But turquoise is the only boat that's already on port tack. And you can see she gets with the shift straight away. She sailed the first part of the beat on the lifted tack. The wind's starting now to move back to the right, and she's looking better and better. So eventually, sailing the shortest distance by sailing in phase with the shifts gets her closer to the windward mark. Because the pink boat wasn't able to get onto the lifted tack, any gains she seems to have gained by taking the what was the biased end of the line is completely gone. Okay, so let's look at exactly the same geometry, but this time there's consistently more pressure on the left-hand side. Classic, absolutely classic coastal conditions here. This could be, I could be sailing at Emsworth up the creek. So I will rotate the page so the wind's coming straight down the page. So this time, Pink's got his gains hat on. He absolutely knows that the pin's worth fighting for. Nobody's getting to get into that pressure before he is. This time, absolutely, the person who wins the pin is going to be the first person into the pressure, and that's got to be the priority. So the further left Pink goes, the bigger the gain. It's quite easy. But actually, I hope you can see that at first glance, both of those two situations look the same. And being able to actually define where the shifts or gains were my priority would definitely help me choose the winning tactic on the start line. Okay. So while we're on the start, as I promised I would, let's just have a look and see at one of the significant rule changes for 2021. Question for you: which of those boats is on the course side according to the definition of start? Well, the answer is none of them. The new definition of start only applies to the hull. So the pole, the spinnaker pole, the crew, the tiller extension, none of those bits apply. As long as your hull is behind the line, you're behind the line. That's really sad for me. I remember learning my rules from Elstrom's little green book, and there used to be a fantastic picture of a guy on the foredeck, hang on to the forestay, leaning over the front of the boat to get over the finish line quicker. The exact same definition of hull applies to the finish. Okay, now we're on our way up the beat. I'm thinking Emsworth again, sailing up the creek here. I'm approaching the shoreline. So what would you do here? Would you, if you were in the yellow boat, the blue boat's just asked for room to tack. Would you tack as soon as possible? Would you call U-tack and duck the blue boat? Or would you call U-tack and tack? Those are your three choices, basically, in yellow's place. As before, the answer to that is really easy if you know which hat you've got on. So you can see the mark's not very far away and the ley line is looming. Most of the fleet are to the right. So if I've got my positioning hat on, I'll probably tack before blue hails, to be perfectly honest, and get back to the middle of the course. I'll certainly tack the moment he looks like he's calling for room to tack. If I'm tacking on the shifts, I definitely don't want to be pinned. I don't want to be restricted from tacking. So again, I'll tack early. If the wind goes further right, there'll be room for another hitch, and blue won't be pinning me out. So if I'm positioning or shift, I'll probably tack straight away. However, if I'm still chasing the gains to the right, I'll call U-tack. Blue then has to tack as soon as possible. If he tacks promptly, I'll duck and keep sailing into the pressure. Sometimes blue's a bit sneaky and delays his tack. He's not supposed to, but it often happens. And if he does, I'll just respond by tacking on a really close lee bow. That means that he won't be able to stay there very long. Before long, I'll be able to tack back if I want to. Whatever happens, I'll have made a gain. So once again, knowing which hat I had on makes that whole process much simpler. I almost know what I'm going to do before I have to make the decision. Okay, so which, coincidentally enough, brings us to the next rule change. We're now required, if conditions dictate, to signal a room to tack call or a U-tack call, as well as just hail. So in a dinghy, that might be a clear pointing signal if I'm asking for room to tack, and it's probably a beckoning signal if I'm hailing U-tack. In a keel boat, we might use the radio as well. But the point is, if it's too windy for somebody to hear you hail room to tack, you have to make some other sort of signal as well. Okay, now we've got a downwind example coming down, rounding Mark 1 to port. Question for you is, should blue drop back and opt for a nice tight rounding, or go Buffalo Girls around the outside? Again, it depends. I'd say if the wind is right and I'm tacking on the shifts, I'll be looking for an early tack. There is no point rounding outside the yellow boat if I'm the blue one. I need to round tight on the mark. So I drop the kite early. I let blue pull ahead. I allow him to make his really nice tactical rounding, and I work really hard to make my rounding as smooth and as tight as possible. If I've got plenty of speed from that nice smooth rounding, I might luff a little bit just to, especially if the wind is left, I might just luff a little bit to increase the gauge and hold my lane a little bit longer. If the wind's right, I'll probably roll straight into attack. However, what if the gains are on the right? How am I going to get around that yellow boat and get there first? Buffalo Girls, here we come. I keep going, but yellow is keep clear boat. I've got to give him mark room, but I'm not going to give him a centimetre more than the mark room he's entitled to. Mark room is room to sail to the mark and then room to sail around it. So I want to force yellow into a really sharp speed killing turn at the bottom, because I'm going to go around the outside and I'm going to get the bow down and be getting into that gain as fast as I can. So there we go. That's exactly what I do. I keep the kite up long. I make a really nice smooth turn, and yellow really has to push the tiller away and make a pretty ratchet rounding. All I need to do is get my bow forward, and I'll definitely be first to the game. So, okay, that looks quite aggressive, and lots of people ask, how do the rules work there? What if there's contact? So yellow's keep clear boat at all times, windward leeward. If yellow does not keep clear, she has broken rule 11, whatever happened. What the jury will ask is, Was she sailing within the mark room to which she was entitled? In the wide rounding on the left, she was definitely not. She was sailing way outside the mark room she's entitled to. So if she didn't keep clear, she's broken Rule 11. There's no exoneration. That's that. If I protest, she will be disqualified. In the tight rounding on the left, though, yellow is definitely sailing within the mark room that she's entitled to. She has broken Rule 11, but she will be exonerated, which brings me nicely to the other significant change for us. The effect is the same. All of these things were dotted around the rule, but all references to exoneration are now under Rule 43, where we can find them. So the point here is, in the second rounding, yellow is exonerated from breaking Rule 11 because she was sailing within the mark room she was entitled to. And if either the right-of-way boat or the sailing within entitlement boat broke Rule 14, they are exonerated from breaking that too, so long as there's no damage or injury. Very good. So have I got time? Just about. I've got a bit of video for you. I hope this is going to work. It's quite funny. I think it is anyway. Here we go. So this is the leeward gate. Don't worry about the windsurfers. They're going down to finish. Here comes the leading 470. And he has decided to, interesting, he's gone round the go left gate mark, but he's left it to port. Okay, interesting. Here comes the second 470. He has gone around the, okay, he's gone around the go left mark to port. Interesting. And he's also gone around the go right mark to port. Okay, fine. Here comes the third 470. And he has gone round the go right mark to port. I think that's what the race officer intended. Well done. Okay. Oh, here comes a 49er. All right. Yeah. Okay. He's gone round the go left mark to port. Ignore the windsurfers. We always do. Here comes another 49er. And he's gone round the go left mark to starboard. And one more. Oh, he's going to capsize. Oh, no, he's not. Oh, he's going to hit the mark. Oh, no, he's not. Anyway, you get the picture. I think eventually he goes round the go left mark and leaves it to port. How confusing is that? Right. Okay. The reason I showed you that is that there is one more change that's relevant to us when we're doing our club racing. And that is that in the old days, if the race officer saw somebody sail the wrong course, he'd have to protest. Now he can just score somebody did not sail the course. So that puts a bit more onus on us, because if we think they've got it wrong, we need to go and look at the results and ask for redress if we think the race officer got it wrong. Whereas previously, we would have just had to wait and see if they protested us. So there you go. Just on time. We've done strategy, tactics and rules in half an hour, and there is time for some questions. As I say, mine's not the only blueprint for strategy, but I hope I've showed you that if you have a good process for making a strategy, the tactical decisions will become clearer. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've seen and you order my book from my website, I will send you a signed copy. And I'm interested to see if we've got any questions.
Thank you, Mark. I think I've been listening to that talk or variations of it for over 10 years, and I always pick up something, a little reminder that I've perhaps forgotten. So it's really great to hear it once again, and really looking forward to putting some of those tips into practice. We have had a couple of questions. The first one from Peter, and he says, I always get caught on the start line. Either I'm luffed to a standstill by boats below me, or I'm told I have no rights if I try to do the same. Who is right under the new rules?
Okay, Peter, that's a really good question. And new rules or old rules, the answer is actually the same. the whole point there is that before the start, there's no proper course. So you can sail wherever you want. But if you are a right-of-way boat and you alter course, every time you alter course, you must give any other boats room to keep clear. Now, that room to keep clear might be that they have to pull the sails in and sail over the start line. It might be that they have to tack off, or they might just be able to do it by luffing up. But the point is that so long as there's a way of them keeping clear, then the boat luffing has not broken a rule. Now, what often happens is a boat comes in really fast from behind, establishes an overlap, so suddenly becomes right-of-way boat. In that case, initially, he has to give the other boat room to keep clear. That initial doesn't last very long. That's rule 15. And then if he alters course, again, he has to give the other boat room to keep clear. So it's all about, did they give you room to keep clear? And if they did, I'm afraid the fact that you end up head to wind, you haven't really got much protection from that. So long as they gave you room to keep clear, they have not broken a rule. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so often people forget that you can use the going forward sailing over the line as a way to keep clear, and actually you don't get any kind of protection from the start line being there. If that's your way to keep clear, that's the way you have to go.
Sadly not, although sadly not. In fact, I think we saw a little bit of that on one of the races in the Prada Cup. Exactly that. Okay.
Another question from Jack. Can you please explain the new definition for the zone?
Well, unless I'm being really dumb, I don't think there is a new definition. The zone is, and I probably need to double check on my rule book, but the zone is basically 3 hull lengths from the mark. And I'm not aware that anything has changed there. I'm very happy to have a quick. Are there any other questions, Hannah? And I will just.
Yeah.
This is all rules experts and non-rules experts should always. It's so easy. Take a look at the rules to check that they're not talking rubbish, and that includes me. I can't recommend highly enough the World Sailing app for doing that, because it's really easy to navigate and it's very easy to find all the definitions, etc., etc. So I'm just doing that. Are there any other questions, Hannah, while I'm doing that?
There are. We've got one more from Andrew, and he says, are there any perceived advantages in the new boat start-finish definition that outweigh all of the disadvantages? And he gives an example, automatic line crossing detection systems, and in a mixed fleet when you can't see the leading edge of the boats.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, so you have to remember that I am not a gamekeeper, I'm a poacher. Although I sit on the Racing Rules Committee, I very firmly regard myself as a poacher, not a gamekeeper. I think it's an absolutely crazy idea. And I just feel so sorry for our volunteer race officers at Emsworth, who've now got to try and see around the people who are trapezing over the line to see if the boats, the other side of them, are over or behind the line. I realise it's a perfectly good idea for match racing and single fleet racing, but I don't understand the reason for it, and I prefer the old rule. But there you go. That's a personal view, obviously not an RYA view. I hope that's what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, I'm sure it will cause some conversations in the bar after racing when we're safely able to go back to that kind of racing environment we were once used to. Question from Stuart. Downwind.
Hannah, I'll just ask the question on the zone. Here we go. My app has found the definition straight away. The area around a mark within a distance of 3 hull lengths of the boat nearer to it. A boat is in the zone when any part of a hull is in the zone. So as far as I can see, the definition hasn't changed. It's still a hull. Hull is not actually a defined term, but it seems pretty clear that from the recent World Sailing rules that they don't count a bit of a spinnaker pole that's sticking out the front as part of the hull, but they do count the wings as part of the hull. Okay.
Thank you. And
sorry.
yes, so this question from Stuart, and I think it probably will depend what kind of boat he's talking about. He asks, downwind, best VMG route selection to avoid being blanketed by those behind.
Yes, very good. And that's why we love traditional sailing, and why downwind sailing in the America's Cup doesn't look so interesting. It absolutely depends on what sort of boat you've got, and it also depends on what your strategy is. So, for example, a classic Cows Week keel boat. I'm sorry to talk keel boats. I'm sorry to go to the dark side, but it's a really good example. Quite often you're running against the tide, and the way of not being blanketed is to sail high and get into a clear lane above the other boats. And all that happens then is they get into the slack tide and sail through to leeward of you. Whereas actually just taking the pain and just soaking down a little bit slow and a little bit deep until you're 3 or 4 boat lengths to leeward of them is the way forward. Or even if it's a handicap race, sometimes just soaking low into a lane and letting them go past is a better solution. Top tip I learned from Mark Cavell is always look at the burgee of the boat behind to get a good feel for where the middle of his blanketing zone is. And it's amazing how you don't actually, even just 1 boat length to leeward of that line, it makes a huge difference to how much you're blanketed. Your best VMG answer, the answer is it absolutely depends on your boat. If you're sailing an asymmetric boat, you just can't afford to, generally, you just can't afford to sail lower than your VMG angle. So you're much better off to try and blast forward and get free of it all. When you've got a symmetric spinnaker boat, then it's a lot easier to sail by the lee and just take every little puff, every little wave, and just try and soak out of it. I would always, I think, as a coach, or if I was sailing with somebody less experienced, I'd always try and encourage them to soak out of a blanketed situation rather than luff out of it on a run, because usually that ends up you end up sailing a much shorter course to the mark. Hope that helped.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I think, sorry, we've got one other question here, which perhaps is just a clarification from what we were talking about earlier.
Yes,
and that's under the new line rules. Does a fixed bowsprit count as part of the hull?
Great question, James. And as we understand it at the moment, as I say, hull is not a defined term, but as it might be defined in the class rules, which of course makes the poor old race officer's job in a menagerie fleet even more of a nightmare. As we understand it at the moment, the fixed bowsprit is not considered part of the hull. But as I say, it's not a defined term, and time will tell.
That's brilliant. I think that's all the questions that we've got at the moment. Thank you so much. I always learn something from your talk, even though I've heard the variations of it. I can't even count how many times now, but I do honestly pick up so many tips every time I listen to it. So that's really interesting, and great kind of reminder for everyone who perhaps hasn't done quite so much racing as they'd maybe have liked to over the last 12 months. And hopefully it won't be too long before we can put it back into good use. Agreed. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And don't forget, you can get your copy of Tactics from Mark's website and also from the RYA publication stand. You can also pick up your copy of the 2021 to 2024 rules book in the exhibition hall as well. Coming up next on the Suzuki main stage, we have the RYA Yachts and Yachting Club of the Year supported by Gallagher, so don't forget to join us for that. But before that starts, you do have time to visit the exhibition halls. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you later.